they said, yeah, the total cost is going to be about 1% of your transaction value. So you need a bill clerk who will verify all these bills that you're going to give us. Then there will be a cashier who will actually countersign and disburse that cash. And there will be a security fellow who will stand there and ensure that nothing untoward happens with cash. And cash needs to move from the nearby town to this village. So therefore, there is that van and the security which goes with it and all that. So all of this will cost 1%. And typically in a commodity, the margin you make is 1%. So if you away that 1% to a bank, then you are left with nothing. So this is what do we do? So we then went back to some of these traders and asked them, what can you do, because you guys disburse cash every day in Mandi. They said, yeah, we can do this job, and yeah, we'll do this job for about 1/4%. So how is it possible? Because activities are very similar. This guy, no, I will roll in my cashier and bill clerk and security will all roll into one. In the morning he'll go to the bank to withdraw cash and bring it here, and then he'll disburse all that and go back. And therefore I can do it at 1/4 of the cost. So the institutions like banks, transaction systems, information highway, whatever else that are emerging still, while they are still emerging, these middlemen are making up for the lack of all of that and discharging that service at 1/4 of the cost or whatever be the in different kinds of activities. 1/3, 1/4, 1/5, 1/10, that's the kind of cost that is there. And therefore, you need to leverage them for what they are good at. Because you can't add this cost onto the farmer or onto the consumer. At the end of the day, that's what happens. So therefore, you need to get them in. Why are they bad? Because they block information flow along the chain. They block market signals along the chain. And therefore are able to extract a larger value for themselves because they make the whole chain opaque. The consumer has no clue what is happening, the farmer has no clue what is happening at the other end, and therefore they act as principals and make the whole chain opaque. So we said if only we can make use of them in physical transmission, cash disbursement and so on. Even quality assessment, we don't have a laboratory infrastructure to test quality on the spot at every farm. Somebody has to visually judge and buy. So that's an institutional void that needs to be, that is again substituted by these middlemen very well. Anybody can make out in terms of what is the admixture, I would call it. You have a basic material and it's mixed with something else that you can make out physically. You can count, weigh, all that physically you can do. But depending on the material, if you are buying coffee, what is the cup taste of this coffee as you see it, it is not easy. With how much is the oil content inside it, soybean, you can't make out. What is the gluten content in this wheat, you can't make out. So this is the expertise that these people have built, this middleman over time, that I'll assess this and I'll actually undertake a guarantee at the other end, you test in your laboratory and ask for that, you pay. So that's the kind of an institutional void that is made up. So we said, okay, let's make use of them in all of these, but let's bypass them when it comes to information flow and market signals. And that's again the role that internet has played, that's again the role that Sanchalak has played. So this ability to have an opposable thought in your mind is probably the most mature of the intellectual maturity, saying that the same answer can be right, same answer can be wrong, and therefore how do I play with it in being creative. So I think is the other aspect that is there. So let me come to the last part, which the third phrase, which is obviously not a surprising phrase for the heritage of this institution, which is the social responsibility. Many institutions don't have, and therefore it is important. I just wanted to underscore that aspect also as part of my talk. There is a social responsibility, pedigree and heritage that you have. But when it comes to business, there were arguments in the past and even now as to what is the role of business. We have a society, we have different organs of society, and business, the commercial enterprise, the for-profit enterprise, whatever you call it, is created to serve the consumers in a competitive market, make profit, deliver value to investors pay taxes, and government will then take on the role using those taxes to deal with social responsibility. There is civil society organization which will deal with that kind of responsibility. Your business responsibility is best served. You conduct business responsibly. You compete fairly. You pay taxes. Okay, in an environment where taxes are not necessarily paid by everybody, in an environment where there is a huge amount of black money, this in itself is a very responsible action. So therefore, it's a legitimate argument to say that businesses don't have any other social responsibility but to conduct their business responsibly. And that's how the capitalism delivered all this while around the world. But as we look back, okay, there was one issue in terms of the level of greed of capitalism and therefore what are the impacts of that. But more importantly, we are seeing that the rest of the society has not delivered its role, and there is probably a role that business can play. And that's how in a business school we also talk about corporate responsibility, social responsibility. That's how businesses are talking about social responsibility. If you look at inequity, I mean, all of us obviously living in India know the inequity very visible all around us. But when you look at statistics, like the wealth of 85 individuals, not even a part of the people present in this room, top 85 individuals around the world, the wealth is equal to the wealth of the bottom 3.5 billion people. And that's how skewed the world has become in terms of income, asset, inequality. And we talked about physical maturity and said, well, some of us are fortunate, many of us are not. Part of it is also out of this, the malnutrition, the child mortality, and all of these kinds of issues associated with that. And obviously, higher education itself and higher education makes a lot of difference. But most people in this world are not privileged to have access to this. And therefore, there is a context of social inequity that we haven't solved as a society. And then there is, in some sense, a bigger problem, but it is tomorrow's problem, is that we are on the end of July now. In less than 4 weeks from now, August 20th, we would have exhausted all the natural resources that we are going to regenerate till December 31st this year. What is called a World Overshoot Day. So that is falling on August 20th this year. Some years ago it was obviously on December 31st, some years ago it was even better than that. That means we are living beyond our means as a society. So all the natural resources that we can regenerate in 18 months, we are spending in 1 year. That's what August 20th will translate into for December 31st. So I think this is an unsustainable position. It's even more unsustainable for a country like India, where we are 17% of all people in the world, but only 4% of all world's water resources, and only 2.5% of the land resource. These are finite. So the level of unsustainability is even worse for India. So therefore there is a social dimension in terms of inequity, there is an ecological dimension in terms of natural resource depletion that is happening. So I think that skew is something that as a society, in whichever manner we organize ourselves over decades, have not been able to do it to our own satisfaction. So that's the context in which business started looking at social responsibility. Business, of course, can get some money in, but more than money, it is the management capability. the leadership and orchestration that is possible, the partnership that we can bring to the table. There are many ways in which business can engage and create a development which is more sustainable for tomorrow. And this is the argument, as different from the pure economic citizen argument. That other organs of society will do other things. The businesses also say that we are a socio-economic citizen. We don't exist independent of society, because the capitalism has gone to a level where we are not just independent of society, but we are not just indifferent to society, but many times the profits are made at the cost of society. So from that perspective, also businesses need to look at a capitalism which is more humane and more conscious. And from the perspective of the other objective that we did not resolve as a word, also there is there are many models of responsibility, discharge. People say you make profit, you spend some of that money on philanthropy. Good, but not enough, because we just had this new CSR section in the Companies Act, and it says you spend 2% of your profit on these kinds of activities. The total such money per year is going to be, at its most liberal estimate, about 25,000 crores. 25,000 crores is the money that the government of India spends in 4.5 days on welfare activities. So all the resources, if it is just money and more philanthropy, is not going to make a difference. It makes some difference somewhere, but okay, even assuming we accept the figure that is most common in the narrative of Indian public discourse of saying that 15% of money reaches the beneficiary. So you multiply this by 7 times and say, okay, now not 4, but one whole month equivalent is what all the corporates will spend. I don't think this will make a difference, because 12 months can't make a difference. What will one more month do? So it has to be something more than money that has to come. And businesses will come in and do all that. Obviously, if there is a value that is also delivered to business, otherwise we have a shareholder who will vote and say that, okay, fine, 2% is legal mandate, spend 2%. Until now it is also not there. Even now it is not actually a mandate, it is only a, you spend and disclose. In some sense it's not a mandate. But if you innovate, go back to the creative tenacity that I referred in the beginning, and innovate in a manner that you make more money as a company, and while doing so, the poor become richer, the environment becomes better, and then you say you do more of this, it is benefiting everybody. Now, if there is an innovation of that kind, then there is no limit. It's not I make profit and spend a little percent on that on some activity. But in the very manner of doing business, I enhance the greater value. I think that's the innovation that really you need to think about when you talk about social responsibility in business. And that's where each of us fitted in. If there is one reason why 50 lakh request got 10 crore sanction, it was because of this. That this is a business model with a social collateral, or a social responsibility model with a business collateral. And that level of every single activity that is done, if a price is discovered in the village, farmer is empowered to decide when and where to sell. If he decides to sell to IPC, he will deliver it in our warehouse. There is a transaction cost which is saved by the farmer, there is a transaction cost which is saved by us. Because it is directly delivering to us, we are able to preserve the identity of the produce and store it and then move it to our product formulation in an identity segregated fashion. that in turn goes back to farmer as a signal from the market as to what variety is more in demand that you need to plant for your next crop, not on the basis of what got a better price last year, because that was the only mechanism that was available. And if we invest in productivity enhancement effort, obviously the productivity is rising. Even at a lower price, the farmer's profitability is rising. And that would mean that our long-term inflation is under control for the product that we are working with, and therefore there is an enhanced consumer franchise for that. And that becomes a virtuous cycle. If you are engaged in water harvesting as we do, if you are engaged in soil enrichment as we do, it's a long-term productivity enhancement operation which is working there, which in turn is benefiting us with the same long-term inflation. So every single activity that is designed in such a manner that you enmesh the interest of the farmer with the interest of the shareholder. And that's innovation, which also comes out of your opposable mind in terms of intellectual maturity. So all of these really go into making this work. And this is just one illustration of what ITC does. Like each of our activity, there are business activities with a very similar spirit and philosophy that are done in terms of going all the way up to growing trees for making paperboard or notebooks rather than importing pulp, which is the conventional wisdom. But you help the farmers to improve productivity, you do your R&D to ensure that you have your trees that can grow in any kind of a soil. So you start from there. So each of these activities engage like that. So with these kind of business models today, ITC, there is no other company in the world of its dimensions, which is water positive. That means we help harvest more water than the water that we consume. And that's quite a bit for a company which is manufacturing paper and paperboard. We are, because the water is harvested in every conceivable fashion. If there is a factory, every factory's attempt is to make that it is water self-sufficient there in terms of what you're harvesting and what you're consuming as much as possible, and we do it on that. And carbon positive, that we help sequester more carbon than the carbon that we are emitting by virtue of our operations. Because if you're in a business operation, you're in manufacturing, obviously there are going to be emissions. You ensure that through sequestration of carbon, you do more of that. Solid waste is another big problem. So we are solid waste recycling positive. That means we recycle more solid waste by also engaging with post-consumer waste than the solid waste that we release. So this is on the environment dimension. On the social dimension, today we have integrated more than 7 million livelihoods into our own value chains. That's by far the largest that any corporate entity has engaged directly, next only to the government, in terms of engagement which is there. All of this not at the cost of shareholder value. I think the triple bottom line philosophy that is adopted is that the total shareholder returns, when you add both your share price and the dividends that are distributed together, is at 26% year-on-year compounded. I think that kind of return on this base is also not something which is common. So I think that is the kind of an outcome out of the actions that we do. And at the core of all of this, I think is no different from the three phrases that I pulled out from your own mission statement: creative tenacity, intellectual maturity, and social responsibility. I think that's the message I would like to leave with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your informative speech. I will now request Dr. N.R. Parasuraman to hand over the memento to Mr. S. Shivakumar. hand it over to Dr. Ullas Rao.
The present task of moderating today's Q&A session. While we'll be getting all the questions, there were a couple of queries that were also ringing in my mind, so I'll just start off with the first question, sir. So now e-Chopal has been very synonymous in connecting to the ultimate farmer and increasing the prosperity. So the strong advocates of FDI and retail would also argue that we are also ultimately connecting the farmer, but still there has been a lot of resistance to FDI and retail for the same reasons. So your thoughts on that?
FDI and retail is far more nuanced than this. The arguments in favor of FDI and retail are it's a threefold. The first is that more competition, and certainly competition from a resource strong company, that's where FDI comes in, will help the consumers as the first argument. The second is that the retail is probably the largest employer, and therefore it will generate a lot of jobs. And third is that the international retail companies have understanding of the supply chains much better, and therefore with the investment that are coming in will help connect the farmers for certain kind of produce and other SMEs and so on for other kinds of produce, and will make that far more efficient. So if we examine each of these, there are both pros and cons, and that's why I am saying it is more nuanced. Firstly, the benefit to the consumer, it is very likely. But the counter question that really comes in is that in most places, when competition really becomes few large players as opposed to many small players, in the long run, it is detrimental to the consumer interest. So there are both kinds of examples around the world. And a corollary to this in India is that India is also called a nation of shopkeepers, because if you can't do anything else, let me just go and set up a small shop. Demand is there, population is growing, incomes are rising, so therefore I'll have some business activity. And therefore, if we say how many jobs may get created in the modern retail versus potentially how many entrepreneurs may lose the source of livelihood, is the second nuance which is there. There are, of course, clear evidence which says that next to a large modern trade is where the immediate impact is. Quite a lot of small shops close down. There is also evidence that the small shopkeepers reinvent themselves and offer more personalized services to the consumers. And India has different socio-economic streams, and consequently both modern retail and the small retail will coexist. And therefore, the maximum the modern retail will probably touch in India in the foreseeable future is probably about 20% of all trade. So therefore, it's not a big harm. So that's the other side of the argument which is also there. The last point in terms of what is the level of efficiency that will come in the supply chain, I think it is critical that the areas related to agriculture, those are also reformed concurrently. Otherwise, you may have a retail but no ability to build a back-end supply chain because the APMC Act that I talked about is still not fully reformed. There are Essential Commodities Act we just saw getting reinvoked. There are other regulations like Forward Contracts Act. I think a lot of other reforms need to take place simultaneously. So my position on this is that India is an extremely attractive market at this point of time. Right from 2005, not in the last year or so, but right from 2005, it ranked at the very top of the attractiveness index globally that AT Kearney prepares. And therefore, every retailer around the world is looking at establishing a foothold in India. And therefore, this is the time for us to put those conditions and have a calibrated reform that an FDI in retail will not automatically mean back-end investment. Therefore, that condition about back-end investment and so on. And you also need to create an environment in which the small retailers, that ecosystem also flourishes and competes with this modern retail. So I think this is true for most part of reforms in India, given that we are such a diverse and heterogeneous society. Literally for every reform, there is also a counter argument that it is impacting something. So the role of government really is in terms of how do you really balance this interest, what is the level of calibration that is required so that the long term is more productive and the short term impact on some people doesn't really become bad. So I think that's the kind of thing on FDI retail.
Thank you, sir. So there's one more question. I mean, of course, you have spoken extensively about the recent CSR mandate. So, I mean, we just wanted to take your mantra for companies as to how they can use CSR as a platform to make a positive impact on the company's bottom line.
See, basically, two mantras, both of which I talked about in some sense. So one is innovation. I said obviously if it has to make a difference to society and to your own bottom line as a company, it won't happen automatically. So, the sentence I used to describe this phenomenon quite frequently across different contexts, not only in CSR, is that in the word or, the either or, there is a tyranny that I can do this or that. That means if I want more quality, I have to pay a higher price. I want something at lower price, it will be poor quality. Versus the word and, which is very powerful. So the power of and versus the tyranny of are. This is bridged by innovation. If you are able to bring the power of and that's where the innovation comes into play. And once you innovate, obviously all the tenacity that I talked about will need to come into play. Then you can do that. The second mantra is in partnerships. That also I briefly mentioned. That every company will have a little money to spend. You can do a little bit in terms of sanitation around your factory premises, build a few toilets in the school or improve school infrastructure and things like that, which will only make a little difference. But if you actually engage in a partnership within your geographical area, because that's where you're more likely to be spending your money on, and the larger ecosystem, somebody has an expertise in water, somebody has an expertise in construction, someone else in social mobilization, someone else in education. You mobilize your resources together in a geographic cluster and then spend money on that partnership basis. I think you are likely to deliver far larger, better outcomes. So, and therefore, innovation and partnerships, you might be one first.
So one question has come from one of our students. So they're budding entrepreneurs sitting here. So any entrepreneurial opportunities for our key school students in the agricultural and the rural markets in India?
Yeah, I think a completely new segment is going to emerge in agriculture, and that's where the opportunities are. This is what I call agri-services. Actually, broaden it and call it rural services, because many of agri and allied activities and non-agri activities, all of this you can combine into one. An example would be, let's say, farm mechanization services. Counterintuitively today, if you go to any farmer and ask, what is your biggest problem? He's going to say labor cost and labor availability. Some time ago it used to be credit, later it used to be marketing, and today it's the cost and availability of labor. Partly because of the rural employment guarantee, some labor is taken away there. Partly and rightly, the children are getting into schools, and every family would want a better quality of life for the children, and therefore people are moving into education. Therefore, the labor reduction is also happening. And the labor productivity obviously is at a very poor level in India that can further be improved through farm mechanization service. But every farmer can't buy the required machinery. Partly it is expensive, partly it won't be utilized. It is a small land only. And so it's a biggest opportunity that is awaiting. Because until now, if you look at the cost of labor increase, the labor wage increase in the last 5 years is more than the increase which happened over the prior 15 years. All of this to date has been more or less offset by the increase in the cost of fuel, because India was an administered economy in terms of diesel and petrol to a limited degree, and those prices also rising. And therefore, the inflection point of cost of farm mechanization versus labor still was tilting in favor of labor. In the course of next 2 to 3 years, in some states it's already happened actually, across country in the next 2 to 3 years, that inflection point is going to occur when the fuel prices are not going to rise as fast anymore, because now we're getting into market level. And labor will continue to rise because there are many more opportunities that are going to open up across different sectors. And therefore that inflection point will mean farm mechanization is more efficient than labor in India. So that service provision is a third party operation. This will be very local because type of machinery that is required for different crops, different soil conditions, all of that, and that's an opportunity. Transfer of knowledge into farmers from the laboratories, and vice versa. Transfer of knowledge from the farmers back to scientists, transfer of farmers' problems back to scientists so that you actually are engaged in the right kind of research. Those are different kind of services which did not exist in the past. So this completely agri services as a new emerging area, I think, is an opportunity for young entrepreneurs. Besides agriculture itself, today I see many more educated youth getting into agriculture, both agriculture in village in a modern way, as well as peri-urban agriculture in a modern way. Greenhouses are shooting up around all metro cities in terms of producing vegetables for the cities. And at least I am myself mentoring 7 such youngsters who are doing these kind of activities, and there are many more that are there out in the field. So I think it's a completely new emerging area, and but obviously you require everything that I said today. It's not a short-term game that I start providing service and next year I'll be able to become a big business. You need to start learning by the time inflection point comes in, and then engage if it is machinery and so on. It's a difficult business to engage in because it's a transition time. Some years later it will probably be much more easy because the new environment would have been set in. But if you are a pioneer going through this trouble, you have an opportunity to learn faster, become bigger and more successful. So it has its own advantage, but I think it's a sector certainly which has plenty of opportunities.
Thank you, sir. So just taking a few from this, you have spoken extensively about the corporate social responsibility as well. So there's another question, which says that in its endeavor to drive companies to innovate and work towards sustainability, which has become the buzzword, should the government play the role of a regulator or that of a facilitator?
Yeah, I think pretty much in every area, not only in the area of sustainable development, in every area government has to play both these roles. Because there are conflicting interests for different sections of society that I talked about. Unless there is a regulator, these conflicting interests will get decided in favor of the more power. And that's the role that the government will have to discharge. Because just in agriculture example, continuing with that, there is an interest of a small farmer whose resources are few, who would want higher prices to become, at least get square meals a day. Then there is a low income consumer who want the prices to be lower. And their interests are very different. You want to intensify, raise productivity so that both these meet, that with more productivity, prices can be lower and farmer can be more profitable. Then you are impacting the ecology. More intensified agriculture would mean the fragile ecology that is already there has its own further implications in terms of what are you doing to your soil quality and so on, water availability and so on. So that's another conflicting interest for the society as a whole. So therefore there is a role of a regulator that comes in that the government has to play. Quite often in more mature, at one level and more micro kind of environments at two level, there is a fair amount of self-regulation which happens. Because any amount of regulation from a much higher order will not be able to implement at a ground level. So for the Water Users Association, for example, that we form as part of our water conservation efforts, it succeeds only because we raise the capacity of the farmers in governing themselves, rather than saying that somewhere the central government or state government will determine how will the water get distributed among people who are at the front end of this canal and downstream of this canal and so on. So it can only happen when it is done. So there is a regulation and facilitation. Obviously, we are a transition economy, lots of institutions have to form, therefore there is a role of facilitation without power. Because quite often people say that if only government is there, I will be far more successful. So my take is that no, that's not the case. Regulation has to be there. I think the problem is that many part of those regulations, many part of those facilitations are discretionary in terms of power, and that discretion gets exercised, and that breeds corruption. So therefore, if you also have a fair amount of self-governance, and the government is engaged with the larger bodies, the level of corruption will then go down. You are in much more proximity. The reason why there is advocacy for more of local self-government is because when you are next to me, you will hesitate a lot more to be corrupt, as opposed to somebody somewhere sitting and saying, you want this license, it has to be paid. So I think both governance and regulation have their interplay with corruption, and is another issue that we need to really sort out.
Yes. So finally, a question on behalf of all the students of management. So all are curious to know, so ITC is present in a dozen of diversified businesses. So what is the management of mantra of ITC that you continue to add value to the shareholder wealth?
So there are two dimensions to this. See, one dimension is that a lot of this diversification, although they appear very disparate in terms of businesses, are all very related. Below the radar in some sense. So if you have an Ashirwad Atta which succeeded within 18 months of launch and became #1 player in the country, competing with the who's who of the world's brands, everybody is present here, world's largest agribusiness players who are here, India's best domestic players who are here, is because the diverse competencies which are residing in the various businesses were harnessed. In terms of consumer understanding, product development, brand building, trade marketing and distribution, all of this came from our original business, which is products. And then product development activity got enriched a lot more from our hotel business, who are engaged with consumers every single meal of the day, all around the country, through our restaurants and different kinds of cuisines that we service. And the back end in terms of supply chain, in terms of how do you create an identity preserved supply chain, which is an idea which came from the eChaupan initiative. But it transplanted a lot of competence from our leaf tobacco business. So every agricultural product has this issue in terms of the consumer is looking for different consumer properties. If you take the example of atta that I started with, the organoleptic properties outside that, how does it taste, what is the texture, color, softness of the roti that I make with it, water absorption capacity, all that the consumer is looking at that. At the other end of the farmer, when the wheat is produced, you are transacting with the farmer on physical property that I described a little earlier, saying that what is the wheat, what is the color of the wheat, how much is the damaged wheat in this, and how much is the admixture in terms of some stems or some stones and everything else that is mixed in this. But what will connect the physical properties of wheat to the organoleptic properties of the consumer is the understanding of the chemistry in wheat. In terms of if a little more water has to be absorbed in the dough, what is the chemical property? In this case, let's say broken starch content. How does it come out of what background? And then if you have your complete agricultural map in terms of what are the soil condition, how much was the sunlight, how many days was the total crop sown, what variety was there at the back end in terms of the farmer, then you are able to translate those physical properties to this chemistry and then in turn to the consumer properties. So therefore, your ability to draw these multiple competencies came from multiple businesses. The packaging development and printing came from another business and so on. So on the face of it, they'll appear very diverse in terms of businesses, but in terms of how the multiple competencies are harnessed is part of the corporate style. And that is one key. The second is the governance structure of the company. Because although they are all related in some sense, but they are all independent businesses. So every one of these, atta you are competing with half a dozen different best of the class competition. Biscuits similarly you are competing. Noodles you are competing with somebody else. And confectionery products you are competing with somebody else. Similarly when you get into other products. So each of them require that level of focus on that product market to be able to engage and deal with that competition. So you need that extreme focus at the operating level. So therefore it's divisionalized in a manner that each of the business has an extreme focus on that product market. And at the next level of what is called the corporate management committee is the role of a venture capitalist. That how each of these business should get its resources. Like I went and said, each of us, please give me some resource. So every year the company makes a rolling 5-year plan. And all businesses are coming with dozens of ideas saying that I want resources for this. So there is a corporate management committee which really operates as a venture capitalist and says that, okay, which idea requires which kind of a resource. And resource, of course, is finance, resource is people in terms of skill that you want to have, resource in terms of risk that each business entails in itself, and what level of synergy that is there with the rest of the competencies. And then a strategic supervision at the board level. So a 3-tier governance structure that ensures focus at a product market level and get a venture capital and strategic supervision at the level is what keeps this diverse company together and harness all the competencies. And that's what it was.
Thank you, sir. With this, we come to an end to the Q&A session. Thank you, one and all.
I would now request Dr. Emma Suresh to deliver a vote of thanks.
Dear members of the audience, at the outset we wish to thank our Chairman Dharmadhikari Dr. Virendra Hegde for his encouragement from the time we conceptualized the idea of a foundation day lecture. We also wish to express our thanks to our speaker of the day, Mr. S. Shivakumar. I'd like to say that when I contacted him, it was around 12 o'clock midnight, I sent a message to him. Normally when you contacted speaker of his station, it takes a couple of days for us to get a response. And morning I opened my Facebook message and 4:30 or 3:30 I sent a message accepting our request. So I was wondering, it's an early riser or sleep so late. So that shows, how much hard working he has been. Not only that, actually there was a corporate management committee meeting that was scheduled today, which involves the other CEOs of ITC. And since he had committed to SDM IMD, he convinced the other CEOs to honor his commitment, and they also rescheduled their activities to suit our convenience. So, the meeting was rescheduled, actually it got held yesterday, and he flew to Bangalore around midnight, and 6 o'clock he travelled and he was here by 9:30 and sent a message to us, I am ready, can you come at 10 o'clock? So that is the kind of, there's a lot of things, and I know him personally for many years, there are a lot of things we can learn from him. And just to add, in addition to his ITC contribution, in his very first job he created innovation. He created a brand in a very tough edible oil market in Kolkata in the context of mustard oil. And that edible oil brand was famous for many years. That itself has been documented as a case study for training executives in Europe. So that is the kind of achievement he has. And he has worked only in 2 companies. One was in the Farmers Cooperative, after that he has been in ITC, and he has contributed to development of ITC in many spheres, not only in e-Chowpa. I think it's a privilege for us to have him here. He also writes a blog. I'll send the links. Those of you who are interested in knowing more about his contribution can follow the blog. There is much more we can learn from him, and time is the constraint we have. On behalf of SDM IMD, we sincerely appreciate you for readily accepting to agreeing to our request. We wish to thank our gratitude to our secretary, members of the governing council and advisory board members. They have always guided our initiatives in all institution building endeavors. Members of the press and media have always been supportive of the to all our initiatives. We thank them. Members of the corporate community, officers of the government who are present here, the police department who were kindly change the, there was a traffic regulation here, they relaxed it based on our request. So we are grateful to them. Thanks also to the faculty members, our administration staff at SDM IMD, library, computer center, and for their support. Because to organize an event of this kind, there is a lot of back office work that has to be done. There is a lot of work that has gone in this regard. I'd also like to thank our director and deputy director. They supported this initiative, wholehearted support. To the student community in specific, the volunteers for their effort and contribution for the success of the program. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much. Every year we have had an eminent speaker. They have contributed based on their professional skills. They have contributed to institution building in their own sphere, and they have made an impact in their own sector. So I'm sure that in the years to come, as always, this Foundation Day lecture of SDM IMD will be an event which the community in Mysore would be looking forward to. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us on this special occasion. Now I would invite all of you, that is our guests, faculty members, media persons, staff and students, to join us for lunch in the mess.